A professor that isn't a professor. A method that's been around for decades and definitely is not his. It's the closest thing we have to a plant cult. Today, we're exploring the Professor Monstera method and the man behind it. I've come across the Professor Monstera method, or PMM, many times over the years. But in the last 6 months, I've gotten multiple requests to investigate his practices. Reddit threads pop up regarding his method's validity, and he seemed to piss off a few people in Australia. He's even made his way to the infamous PISS Facebook group, which obviously stands for Plant Inspectors Scammer Shoutout. Claudio is an Australian businessman who's gotten into growing rare variegated aroids. Per his own account, he's been doing so since he stopped working with granite countertops.
And this began something that lasted a few years. So what I would do is this. I would wait until whatever I had grew. And this took months. Once they grew, I would chop them up. And I would go propagating again. Every time I did it, I would end up with enough cuttings to be able to keep going. But I was never able to get, say, 70% to work, 80%, 90% to work. I was lucky if I got half of the cuttings not to rot and the other half to work. And even the ones that worked, it was just a huge headache. I kept doing this. I kept doing these cycles. And it got quite disheartening because I actually got down to the stage a few years later, a lot of time passed, where I just had, I think, 4 cuttings left.
He bought a few Monstera albos at peak prices, chopped them all up, and rotted them. He then changed his techniques and eventually came to a semi-hydroponic method which has been used in cannabis for decades, cocoa perlite, with beneficial life, or bennies as the industry calls them. Now this is a proven growing technique of mixing cocoa and perlite together. Hell, they even sell it in a pre-mixed bag. I tried it first in around 2012, but it wasn't for me, so I stuck with leca. And the cannabis industry has long since loved mycorrhizal fungi for their plants. The problem is the scientific effect for aroids in particular is still unproven. And this stuff is wildly expensive. So for most of us, we tried it on Monstera and philodendron, we noticed it didn't really help, and we moved on. But Claudio, or Jim Broski, the alias he goes by, he hawks this set of ancient growing techniques to be his own. And there's an army of fanboys and girls that will attack any defectors of the method. Now this shaming goes on across multiple platforms. From what I gather, it started on Facebook. There's now multiple Facebook pages and groups, and even a paid membership group where everyone, even the moderators, pay to be a part of. The Professor, as he has humbly named himself, has now moved on to Instagram and TikTok in almost an attempt to evade the drama circulating around his Facebook groups. And for good reason. Many ex-moderators have come forward about his shady business dealings. Now, I have my own gripes with charging for information freely available in the age of information. Many of the people who end up switching to his method end up rotting their roots. And I mean, if you've grown plants for a year or more, you can see that this muddy looking media isn't getting air. Monstera roots love air in the root zone. And there's dozens of ways to grow Monstera, but the general consensus is a chunky, airy mix, and we all do different versions of this. We've borrowed from our predecessors for this. None of us made this up. As Newton says, if I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. Now this is the starter pack of what pisses people off about Professor Monstera method, or Claudio. He didn't discover cocoa perlite to grow plants hydroponically. And honestly, this isn't the best method for growing aroids. It works great for a water-loving weed, like weed. He then sells his overpriced aroids even for Australian prices that he claims are superior and have good vibes, and many of them just come with root rot, and he ends up blocking people that sound off about their bad experiences. This method preys on new plant parents that haven't yet discovered the DIY side of Instagram and YouTube, where we all exchange ideas freely, knowing that there's different strokes for different folks. And there's so many different ways to successfully grow and propagate Monstera. But this method requires a $300 starter pack of nutrients, beneficial bacteria, silica, and other additives that are honestly questionable in their efficacy. Now, a few of these basics work great, A complete nutrient program with silica and even some beneficials can grow very healthy plants. That's a fact. But you can usually get all of that for between like 30 to 50 bucks, not 10 times that. And as we mentioned before, if you mention you're not following the PMM, you'll be banned from the groups and questioned into oblivion as to why you are not following his method. And if you are following the method, you'll be told you aren't doing it correctly to grow roots. Now, let's arbitrarily review some of the characteristics of a cult. Authoritarian leadership. The group tends to have a figure that exercises excessive control on its members. Exclusivity. Cults believe that they alone have the truth. Check. Isolationism. Some extreme cults force members to renounce old ways and depart from previous groups. General opposition to independent thinking. Likely the most important one, cult members are discouraged from thinking independently as it has already been done for them by the cult leadership. Check, check, check. Now, claiming something to be your own is just a little crappy, like plagiarizing a paper in school. But Claudio is known by insiders to swap the Professor Monstera method to the latest nutrient sponsor who is paying him. Here are direct messages from the infamous GT or Growth Technologies makers of Foliage Focus, asking him to remove the other brands he was hawking, such as Hygen, Sensi, and other competitors. And here he is asking his team to remove the previous sponsor, Nutriflow, and replace them all with GT products in the videos. Now, I understand sponsorship, but if the essence of your brand and group is to use a specific method, then it should be about what works best, not who's paying you the most. And there has been insider information that he actually uses a different pellet in his plants and pots, but he doesn't disclose this. He also demands people to water every single day. Again, a technique taken from the cannabis world, but these are very different plants and cannot be blindly adapted. In a video from a few days ago on a new Instagram profile where he seems to be hiding out from Facebook, he now claims the Professor Monstera method now uses leca and perlite and a little cocoa coir.
Professor Monstera method. The easiest way to do Professor Monstera method. You take a Professor Monstera feed, which has all of our biodiesel stuff in it, and then we feed our plants. And I feed from the top. Just give them good feed. These pots have the Professor Monstera method semi-hydro mix. So this is not just normal cocoa perlite. This mix is mainly leca and perlite with very little cocoa. It's mostly leca and perlite. If you were to use just normal cocoa perlite, you would actually rot the roots on your plant. So I must stress, I worked really hard over a few months to get this feed right. Sorry, to get the mix right.
Should I remind him that this is the pretty in green method? No, I'm just kidding, just kidding. The professor doesn't stop there, as he scams his buyers and contest winners by showing a pretty albo, saying it died, and giving that person a lesser quality plant, turning and reselling the dead plant for a higher dollar. The social media posts seem manufactured and forced, and that's because they are. Jim frequently requests his buyers to post with how happy they are with his plants. This buyer spent $762 for 2 Monstera albos in the last 6 months. And then Claudio uses the excuse of it dying and gets noticeably angry at the buyer. He asks his moderators to post their plants and claim they are using his method, even if they are not. He demands they post their plants from the soil up, so they don't see that they aren't using the cocoa perlite, but maybe just soil. He's also been accused of borrowing money from moderators and bragging about not paying them back, as well as stealing grow equipment from a hydro store and claiming he's never going to give it back. But we're now likely at the point where the lies that Jim Broski has told are eventually catching up with him. Please follow along as the story continues to unfold, and thank you for watching this week's video. Please like the video, and we'll see you next week for another video about plants.